Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening around the world. Welcome to the 7th COVID-19 INSEAD webinar series. Today, we'll talk about tech meets COVID-19. We have two experts in the webinar today, covering both technology and policy. Let me just introduce the speakers first and then dive into the content. Dr. Rodier is a medical doctor specialized in infectious diseases and public health. Has more than 20 years of experience at WHO, where he held different director positions in relation to emerging infection, epidemic response, and health security. Dr. Shasheng Hua, head of Artificial Intelligence Center of Alibaba Damo Academy, has a PhD in applied mathematics from Peking University, is an IEEE fellow, ACM distinguished scientist, and leading authority in the field of visual identification and search. Dr. Hua has served as a chairman of multiple committees for international conferences, including ACM Multimedia and IEEE ICME, and has been honored as a winner of the MIT TR35. Dr. Rodier, Dr. Hua, welcome to our webinar, and we are looking forward to having an interesting discussion with you, like all our alumni and attendants. Let me start with Dr. Rodier, who has been involved in WHO policies for many years now. So, Dr. Rodier, you had led the WHO technical response to the SARS epidemic back in 2003. Of course, today we are in different times with a lot of new technologies and new context. What is different today in terms of the virus itself, maybe? COVID-19 has special features. And in general, not just SARS versus COVID-19, how did that context change, and how can we manage pandemics today, which may be different from years ago?
Thank you very much. And let me first thank INSEAD for the opportunity to bring health security a bit closer to new technologies. And to answer your questions, a lot of changes. Of course, we're dealing each time there is an outbreak, it's a different virus, a different infectious agent. When it comes to coronavirus with SARS and MERS, there was a pattern which was pretty clear, was relatively easy way to rebuild the chain of transmission and to interrupt this chain of transmissions. This is not so much the case with COVID-19, where we do have this pattern of chain of transmissions, but for some reason, particularly the fact that some asymptomatic individuals may play a role in transmissions, it's not so clear to link cases between cases. The case fatality rate is also quite different, and that's a good news of it. It was about 10% for SARS and about 30% for MERS, when it's around 2% and maybe below 2% for COVID-19. So that's the good news in a way. The transmission for the three coronavirus is virtually the same. It's close contact, it's body fluids, and that can be prevented by intervention around infection prevention and control. But I would say a key point for SARS and for MERS was contact tracing. That really helped stop these outbreaks. This is still an issue for COVID-19, but we need to have aggressive testing and aggressive case finding. That's probably the key issues. There are other changes which are extremely important. They are not dealing with the infectious agents, but with the overall context and particularly international instruments, the global framework. And that's the international health regulations. They were endorsed in 2005 following SARS actually, and following the H5N1 threat at that time. No need to go into the detail, but just to say that it's all about an agreement between 196 countries, virtually all countries, an agreement to share information timely, to coordinate response, to build core capacity in peacetime to be ready to respond to crisis, and also this concept of public health emergency of international concern. And however, this legally binding agreement still keep a large room for national sovereignties and put the WHO DG, Director General, at the helm of the overall coordinations. So it's a set of common ground rules that exist today involving virtually all countries, which is follow or not follow, that's another issue, but we can certainly discuss that as well. Another point in terms of changes is a general context. We're still in a world in a way with continuing unprecedented globalizations, and we all know about economic globalization, interdependencies. It's also about international travel. More than 4 billion people travel by plane only that the ICAO figures in 2017. Tourism also increased, low-cost flights and cruise ship with more than 6,000 people on board. I mean, that's starting to make a big changes for us. Urbanizations, also a big change for the mankind. And demographic changing, aging people, but also more chronic diseases like diabetes, cardiovascular disease that play a role even today in the current COVID outbreaks. And then we're still dealing, since SARS and MERS, we're still dealing with other emerging infectious diseases. As you know, they are mainly linked to zoonosis, that means disease at the human-animal interface, often disease in animal, jumping in a way to humans. And you're all familiar with avian influenza initially that started to be a pandemic of influenza H1N1 in 2009 and 10. You know MERS, you know, I'm saying MERS because MERS is not over, the Middle East respiratory syndrome. We're still having cases, even large outbreak in Korea in 2015. We had a large outbreak of Ebola in West Africa that many of you certainly remember in 13-15. We had the Zika emergence involving 40 countries. We had the largest ever reported cholera outbreak in Yemen in 2016-2018. We had pneumonic plague in Madagascar in 2017, pretty large outbreak. And today we're still dealing with the outbreaks of Ebola that started in DR Congo in 2018. And of course, we have other outbreaks. So no need to go into detail, but just to show that emerging infections remain actually part of this global change. Another key change is the global health landscape, I would say, the different actors. Funding has increased, that's a good news, but there are many more actors. WHO is not alone anymore. Since 95, some of you may remember the creation of UNAIDS, but more importantly, since the 2000s, we had the, for instance, the Gavi Alliance, for Global Alliance for Vaccine and Immunizations. We have the Global Funds for AIDS, TB, and malaria. We have the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for instance, and a number of government initiatives, such as a Global Health Security Agenda, a number of NGOs becoming extremely important, like MSF, when it comes to, for instance, epidemic response, and humanitarian actors, increasingly a link also between humanitarian crisis and infectious disease outbreak. The World Food Programme, UNICEF, UNHCR, OCHA, the World Bank has also started to work on it. And industry, of course, even we have the World Economic Forum so having an interest and developing these epidemic readiness accelerators. And industry is central players when it comes to, for instance, diagnostic tests, therapeutics, vaccines, personal protective equipment, etc., etc. So, and increasingly also we have universities playing a role like ProMed, like HealthMap, individual initiatives. So this adds to the complexity of global health security, coordination challenges certainly, but also a number of success stories, including in epidemic intelligence. And the last point probably is technology, the technology revolution, but Dr. War will speak to that better than I do, but I remember starting with mobile phone only in an outbreak of Ebola in Uganda in 2000. First time we could manage an outbreak response with a mobile phone. And then we move on to mapping technology, satellite pictures, database management. All these things have a huge impact on our epidemiology, descriptive epidemiology, so descriptive of the event, description of the event, and also analytical epidemiology to analyze data we had. And then with internet, we started to be able to have a large data sharing virtually everywhere. And then the emergence of smartphone with an increasing number of applications for data reporting, for contact tracing, and then today, artificial intelligence and learning machine, and we'll discuss about that today. So anyway, when it comes to this technology, it's so important because we're starting with a much complex world, with mega data to manage, with contact tracing across countries at the international level, with urbanization, which raises some additional issues. Not mentioning the impact on biotechnologies, when we can do today, for instance, sequencing of agents, and to have molecular epidemiology. And that's extremely also useful for understanding the course of an outbreak. One thing which have not changed is human behavior. It has not much changed much. Fear factor still exists. I don't need to go into more detail. That we'll discuss that over the.
We will come back to this, Dr. Odier, in a few minutes.
Yeah.
But it sounds like I'm not sure whether the technology innovations and the increased complexity balance each other out. It sounds like they reinforce each other, which may be a good thing, bad thing. Good question whether we are much better off today to face what we're facing than even a few years ago. But for sure, technology has helped a lot, and I'd like to move Dr. Hua to discuss a deep dive on the technology. Dr. Hua, you've been in Alibaba for a long time. You've been heading teams in technology innovation. We know technology, all of us read news about how technology has been used in all sorts of different ways to combat COVID-19 and also to support the economy and the society. Can you walk us through some of the key themes of technology that you've been developing, others have been developing, and have been used for this pandemic? And
sure.
Like to share, so
let me share some my screen so you can know better what I'm going to talk. Dr. Roger has already said technology revolution, including AI and machine learning, is very important in a complex world and plays a key part in fighting COVID-19. Here is the technology I'm going to share with you. Indeed, there are quite a few technologies that have been used to combating COVID-19, but we didn't have those for previous outbreaks. Here are some examples. The first one is as shown in this short video, CT image analysis solution, which is a fast and accurate as well as a convenient way to diagnose COVID-19 infection. You know, when a new disease starts to spread, fast and accurate testing is very important. Typically, we need some time to get the test kit ready, especially for a high throughput solution. Well, if we use CT scan image to diagnose the disease, we only need an algorithm or service to recognize the new thing, because we already have CT machines and we already have CT scan images for the suspicious cases. So the technology here is to use the latest visual AI technology as shown in this short video to automatically determine whether the case is a COVID-19 infection or a common infection by other type of viruses or germs. Typically, it's very fast and accurate. The number we have in China is the accuracy can be as high as 96%, and the recall rate can reach 98%. Here shows the whole process, which is quite simple, and the right side also shows the free cloud-based CT image analysis service offered by Alibaba. The second technology is whole genome sequencing analysis using distributed computing technology. You know, the most commonly used testing approach is PCR test. Well, the false negative rate of PCR test is still high, as it only checks 2 or more positions in the gene sequence. Whole genome analysis instead will do a full comparison between the test sample and the known genes of the virus. It is indeed computationally intensive and time-consuming because we're comparing 2 very long sequences to find matched segments. By using distributed computing technology and optimized comparison algorithms, we can shorten the comparison time from 2 to 3 hours to only 10 minutes, which makes the whole test complete in 14 hours. Yeah, it seems the time still long, but already much shorter than existing approaches, which takes 2 or 3 days typically. One unique part of whole genome analysis for diagnosing COVID-19 is that the accuracy is close to 100%. It is tolerant to errors during sampling and sequencing, as well as gene mutations. In addition, when we can use the same technology to analyze the structure of proteins, and this helps accelerate the development of drugs and vaccines. These 2 technologies are about testing. The third one, as shown in this figure, is epidemic prediction, which is based on big data technology. This solution is not to cure the infection directly, but provide data to policymakers and medical institutions to make informed decisions and to take appropriate actions in time, such as keep social distance, putting on masks, travel advisories in time to contain the spread of the virus. As other epidemics, COVID-19 spreading trends can be characterized by mathematical models, as long as we know some key parameters such as infection rate, recovery rate, incubation rate, based on publicly available data such as the one we listed here in the table. We can estimate epidemic size, peak time, lasting days, and so on. And this kind of system also offer a different kind of prediction based on major events or policy changes provided by the country or region. For example, how strict the social distance restriction is executed. And based on our practice in China, the epidemic prediction service is able to achieve something like 98% accuracy with only 2-day lead time for generating the prediction report, and to offer more than 60-day forecast of the epidemic trends. And this is the fourth example. It's about the communication and knowledge sharing based on natural language processing technology. Here are two possible ways to use the technology. One is question answering. That means the general public can submit their questions to the robot using text or speech, which the robot can be an app or can be an intelligent speaker. And then the robot will reply automatically with relevant answers to the question. Another way to use it is automated translation, which enables people to communicate efficiently, almost in real time, even they are speaking different kind of languages. You know, knowledge sharing, knowledge and experience sharing is one of the best prescription to combating the virus. And the next one is cloud computing. It does not directly help retain the virus spread, but it is the platform to enable fast development, fast deployment, and a scalable service for a variety of technologies to curb the spread. This is also why we are able to deliver the CT image analysis service in 2 or 3 days, and to make it serve more than 160 hospitals in a few weeks. Another number, as of April 8, we have seen more than 20 countries and areas, hospitals and medical institutions asked for support from Alibaba to provide this kind of service. And the last example is contact tracing. To stop the spread of the virus, contact tracing is an essential step, and this is why similar initiatives are being adopted in many places around the world. Of course, there are also discussions and debates on that, the advantages and the disadvantages, a lot of discussions. I think it is important to maintain open and constructive dialogues so the technology providers can continuously fine-tune the solutions to make sure they are in the best interest of humanity. Okay, these are the exemplar technologies that people are using to combating the epidemic, which we didn't have in the past. Technology were not ready at that time.
Thank you, Dr. Hua. This is, of course, there's a lot more behind this, and it's great to see all those technologies kind of battling the global challenges that Dr. Odier mentioned before. And also, of course, it's exciting to see how there is a lot of innovation globally going on these days. It's like time is compressed, and we see all sorts of innovative initiatives, including collaboration within companies. You talked about contact tracing, and we all know, like a couple of days ago, how Apple and Google are working to bring this to the world. We know how computers have been used, fast computing has been used for discovering of, for supporting discovery of drugs and vaccines. You know, the big IBM supercomputer is, of course, another one. You at Alibaba, you also have others, obviously. The sequencing of DNA is very interesting. And going back to what Dr. Odier mentioned regarding the specifics of COVID, regarding the mortality and who it affects mostly, it's probably quite interesting to also use those DNA sequencing kind of technologies to better understand why, for example, some young and healthy infected people may have severe symptoms. Is there something special about this? So all this data can feed into policy decisions regarding confinement, who should be confined, and of course, prioritization and management. These technologies are fantastic, and it's, in a sense, we are, in a quotes and quotes, if one may say, kind of lucky to have this pandemic today and not 20 years ago. Of course, on the other hand, 20 years ago, traveling was less. So all in all, it's an interesting question. But as we all know, and as Dr. Odier mentioned, there's a famous quote that says, the biggest challenge of technology adoption is change of human behavior. So let me go back to you, Dr. Odier. You've been seeing the deployment and use of technology over the past decades, WHO and for countries to generally manage various health outbreaks, as you outlined a number of them, which are around today. What can we learn from all those past experiences in terms of being more effective, countries, governments, organizations, companies, in deploying those technologies and having the maximum possible impact? What are some challenges you've experienced? Can you give us some examples from the past so that we can leverage the technology better for COVID-19?
Well, thank you. I think human behavior is actually certainly one of the biggest challenges. At the same time, human behavior does not fundamentally change, but one of this behavior is to adopt new tools and new ideas that really make a proven great value. I think a number of new technology are of proven great value. I mean, when you look at smartphone, how quickly the whole world embark on mobile phone, smartphone in particular, on email communications. So that was spectacular, and it just showed that when tools and services are useful, in fact, human beings will jump on them and use them. When it comes to epidemic control, we are today, I think, when I saw all these technologies and which are available today, we may be at the head of a bigger revolution even today, a new world, in fact. We are already using a number of this technology, but I believe, still in the learning phase when it comes to epidemic forecasting, epidemic response, and even preparedness. We're using them for data mining, particularly for non-health data that play an increasing role in giving us some signals of events. It's also about the management of big data for epidemic intelligence. It's about contact tracing that was mentioned by Dr. War. It's about, for instance, molecular epidemiology and all this sequencing of genomes allow us today to follow COVID-19 when it jumps in one country, in one place, to know where that's coming from, because there are different strains already circulating of COVID-19. For data reporting, for mapping, we're using all these tools for modeling, of course. And there are increasingly, we'll also almost say, an outbreak of applications for smartphone in relation to epidemic response. And of course, in biotechnology, we need to use them more and more. The rapid tests at point of care are increasingly an issue. But what's the big issue for us when it comes to why it's not implemented or why it may not be the only solutions? There are actually not only technological issues in terms of managing an epidemic, for instance. It's broader. I mean, technology is one element that may help many of the other elements, but it has to do with the infectious agent, the different feature of the infectious agents that the technology can pick up earlier. But because the sooner we have information on transmission, on incubation period, on severity, on likely intervention to work, it's important. Increasingly, we're dealing with logistic issues. It's also an area where technology can already bring actually some significant improvement on communication, risk communication to the public. Think about all the media, the social media that exists today. And on human behavior, community, we certainly need more and more technology because it's adopted already by the public sometimes quicker than by the authorities. Still, the technology will not change the issues of national sovereignties. That is always there, which could be an issue when it comes to sharing information. Geopolitical issues still exist, and they play a role in the way we manage an outbreaks. And then the overall culture of communities, for instance, around the protection of personal data that you mentioned earlier. It's an issue in some countries, it's not an issue in others, but that's also something that technology may not directly at least change. The epidemic response is very much intersectoral. It involves the health sector, of course, but also the agriculture sectors, especially for emerging infectious diseases. It involves the transport sectors, the education, communication, even the security sectors. I'm saying all these things to show that implementing the new technology has to infuse the different sectors. It's not just a public health issues. But the tools are there. I'm very pleased to see all this progress made on the tools. I think we're talking here about cross-fertilizations across sectors and between new technologies and the different sectors, and maybe also a cultural change. So I think we are still at the beginning of using this new technology and having a direct impact the way we manage our outbreaks and forecast them. Over.
I'm curious what you have in mind when you say cultural change, at the beginning of the cultural change, which takes us also a little bit to the post-COVID world. If you have any remarks on this regarding technology also.
No, I don't know for the post-COVID world, but certainly when it comes to, I mean, a number of global changes, including climate change and the limitation of planet Earth and so on, it's very clear that we have to change our culture. But here we're more referencing sometimes to the culture of adopting new technologies. I mean, this is clearly a different world which is ahead of us.
Yeah, thank you. It's a lot of it is human behavior, and as you are saying, and we also discussed from the beginning, a lot of it is also coordination costs, as it requires a lot of players to coordinate to solve those problems from different industries, different countries, and that's a big question and a big challenge going forward.
Coordination is always the biggest challenge in the global response.
The usual n-square equation, costs go up to the square kind of. Going back a little bit to the challenges, but from a different point of view, mostly from a point of view of innovation, and also to do a little bit of a deep dive, maybe around the epidemic intelligence, identifying information in the data, signaling the noise. Now, we've seen so much innovation happening the past weeks, literally. Of course, a lot of it is older tools being retooled and recombined and reused, but it's really unbelievable how fast scientific and technological innovation and collaboration is moving. However, I can imagine, Dr. Hua, that in Alibaba, or much like in every other companies, I can imagine also in pharmaceutical companies or biotech, managing innovation processes in your team and in the company under such extreme pressure, such extreme conditions, must be quite a challenge. Could you share with us two things? First of all, generally about managing innovation in such extreme situations and under time pressure, which are never seen before, and maybe go through an example of going back to epidemic intelligence and monitoring and tracing of a deep dive kind of technology that has been developed for COVID and has been continuously improving during these times.
Sure. Dr. Roger has highlighted transportation, education, communication, etc. Different sectors are all requiring new technologies to help. While talking about rapid innovations, this is very super important, especially during this special time. Actually, not only rapid innovation, actually also rapid deployment and scalable and quality serving. But let's talk about rapid innovation first here. When we heard the outbreak in late January of this year, right away, we have an intelligent healthcare team. We started to move and think what we could do. We indeed have been working on healthcare artificial intelligence for quite a long time. But this time, the virus is new, and we didn't have the specific technology for it. But the good thing is that we do have been accumulating related technologies for a long time, such as the deep learning, image segmentation, object detection, classification, searching things from a large corpus, gene analysis, trend prediction, and natural language processing. And this is the first thing we learned, is that we'd better start to prepare for emergencies when we are still okay. That is repairing the roof on sunny days instead of rainy days, right? Even looks like the applications of the technology is still in early stage. We should invest before we actually need it. So based on our existing technology, we create new versions for COVID-19 very soon, including CT image analysis, genome analysis, question answering, and epidemic prediction. Let's take epidemic prediction as an example. We do have trends prediction technologies for other applications, such as transportation volume prediction and transportation safety prediction, but not for epidemic. But when we realize that it is very important to predict the trends of the epidemic, we know we need to work out a solution in a very short period of time. For example, probably 1 week or even shorter time. So here comes the second important thing for rapid innovation under this situation, under time pressure. That is, we move in parallel. But our goal is to work out a scalable solution that can be used for, by many customers. So from the first day, we need to think, we need to work on multiple things simultaneously, such as data collection, model definition, parameter modeling, parameter learning, verification, engineering part, deployment, even user interface and computation resource, as well as third-party dependencies and so on. We started to work on all these aspects, or at least to plan all these aspects almost at the same time. We couldn't afford.
I understand, right? So doing all those things
Sure.
for software and tools and technology must be really exceptional relative to previous situations, which is great. Thank you. Yeah, sorry. Please go ahead.
Right. Yes, we cannot afford to run it sequentially because the time limit, right? The earlier we can work out the solution, the more lives we may save. So for the epidemic prediction task, the goal is to estimate the future trends of the epidemic. For example, the number of confirmed cases, the number of deaths, the number of recovered in the coming 2 months every day, and also the peak time, the lasting days, and so on. This is important for policymakers and medical institutions, as I mentioned before, to take appropriate follow-up actions. However, there's one difficulty here is how to estimate the parameters in the prediction model. Some exemplar parameters include infection rate, recovery rate, incubation rate. The accuracy of the mathematical prediction model largely depends on how realistic or accurate our parameters are. While what is complex is that our social behaviors will be affected by the epidemic outbreak, and the controlling measures are changing over time quite often, which means the parameters themselves are shifting. Some of them are not fixed numbers, but also need to be modeled. And here comes the third point I'm happy to share is to use latest technologies sometimes helps a lot. So here, besides using conventional models for the parameters estimation, we also try to use deep learning technology to estimate those parameters, which generates very promising result. And our prediction accuracy is as high as 98% in China. The last but not the least point is that is to know the most important thing during this special period is to help curb the virus spread and to save lives instead of commercial considerations like cost and the return.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's quite amazing. Thank you very much. This is quite amazing how the models that we are all by now familiar with, the curves that everybody's trying to flatten, that have been estimated with mathematical models and data, how much uncertainty there is there and how much policy making and policy decisions that affect lots of lives and lock down lots of people are basically based on highly uncertain parameters that deep learning technologies themselves cannot even estimate accurately. This is quite interesting to keep in mind, the uncertainty and the decision making under uncertainty kind of challenges. Going a bit deeper on epidemic intelligence, which is a term used widely, at least from the WHO and health policy, but maybe it's good to also define it, Dr. Rodier, for the audience. What would be some lessons from, again, going back and also from this specific COVID experience we have about how to best use epidemic intelligence, which please define for the audience also what it means and what it takes, and how can it help us going forward with COVID-19 in the coming weeks and months, hopefully.
Yeah, thanks. And I would say epidemic intelligence is actually probably an emerging field, and we're still learning. We started working in WHO on epidemic intelligence in the late 90s, and we started something very simple compared to what we could have today, which was a rumor list, a list of all the rumors we could gather here and there, and trying to work on them and to investigate. That was back to 1997. And then we move on with Health Canada. At that time, the Canadians helped us to develop the Global Public Health Intelligence Network, which was for the first time a 24/7 browsing the web, multilingual, which is still running today. So that's JFIN, so-called JFIN, was actually a great improvement at that time for WHO epidemic intelligence. And the point was to look at all potential public health threats. That was a new activity for WHO, which was not designed for that, but mainly designed for developing norms and standards, not very much for epidemic intelligence. We had actually an asset to do that in WHO, which was our 6 regional offices and our more than 140 country offices. So we have a reach in virtually, maybe not all countries, but many countries that really provide or could provide information. We had also a network of collaborating centers for infectious diseases, and a number of specific networks for specific disease, and a number of partners within the UN system, other intergovernmental organizations like the OIE, for instance, and a number of NGOs. So we had all this network to use, and we tried our best to use it. But soon we were in the problem where we could not use data not formally provided by the member states, by the countries. So with the revised international health regulations, we were allowed, it says, WHO may take into account reports from sources other than country notifications. And that was a big leap for us, because then we could start looking at the outside world, all kinds of sources of information, including social media. It's important I'm saying that because today we can and we do gather actually a lot of information, about 3,000 signals every month, among them about 300, I would say, signals that deserve follow-up, and about 30 of those that lead to an investigations. But the key issue is very much to verify.
So, Dr. Day, this is in what frequency? You are talking about these numbers every what? Every month?
I'm talking about this number monthly.
Monthly. Wow.
Monthly. That means every day we also are following up event, maybe from 5 to 12 events every day. There is a daily meeting for that in WHO that follow events, and particularly the ones that deserve investigations. The information outside of this or following this investigation is available on WHO website. There is a website especially for the member states, for government, and another one called Disease Outbreak News that can be accessed by everyone. But I'm saying that because the key points that WHO does today, which is network in countries, is verifications. We cannot just be an amplification of what is being said on the web or elsewhere. We need to make sure what information we said is actually verified. And a good work or a big work of epidemic intelligence is not only to gather intelligence, but to verify. And we do that with National Public Health Authority, with Ministry of Health, which according to the regulations, have 24 hours to reply to us, at least to acknowledge receipts. And of course, WHO, we offer collaborations to further investigate an event. There is a lot of background noise, as you see, from 3,000 we moved to 300 and to 30 only. We use actually, as we pilot a number of approaches, we try syndromic approach to look at everyone could report, events in relation to acute pulmonary problem or acute neurological issues, acute gastroenteritis, and so on. But that was creating too much noise. It worked at national level, but at the global level, unless we could deal now with mega data, it did not really help. What the main objective remain early detections. And again, early detection today is done through this data mining, different sources, and verifications. WHO is developing actually more pieces of software, not alone now, with collaborations with many public health stakeholders, using open source informations. And we're working with, for instance, WHO is working with ProMed, SMAP, JFIN, I mentioned earlier, with the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. The point is to have an open source, looking at open source information, to have a software that really helps. And I'm looking at Alibaba, maybe they can help as well. But anyway, for COVID-19, for instance, the first article was picked up on 31st of December. And by the end of March, we have more than 228,000 signals a day in relation to COVID-19. So it's an unprecedented volume.
Please give us some examples of, if you have some easy available examples of what kind of information you are talking
No, I mean,
to.
that means if you go, I mean, everybody who goes to the web today can find a large volume of articles and discussions in relations to COVID-19. And that leads to a huge amount and a huge volume, which lead to actually the need to develop new filters and have better tools to analyze this huge amount of information. There is a COVID-19 dashboard developed by WHO and by other entities. But again, the complexity becomes so high because of so many signals. Also that we're dealing data from different countries, different studies, different settings, and all this needs to be digested together as much as we can. So all in all, it's very much, again, an issue of cross-fertilizations, which is required between public health and the IT sectors. I mean, especially artificial intelligence, learning machines, what we could do. And I think we need probably more pilot projects to see how that can be developed, tested, and then used on a daily basis. Thank you.
This is quite amazing, and I guess there are many key takeaways from here. But one thing that I keep picking up from the discussion we're having is how amazingly complex the whole system is. And of course, the discussion in the media is relatively simple, always trying to kind of find the main point. It seems not as simple to kind of identify early on the signals that matter and share them globally after verification. Although I'm sure over the next few months, or maybe year, we will know a lot more about what we could have done better to have avoided this disaster for the world. And we'll come back to this later on to discuss more about this. What can we learn from this experience, not just past experiences going forward. But before going to these lessons from this experience going forward, given the complexity we just heard from both of you, technology and coordination and institutional complexity in many ways, I'd like to open a little bit the discussion for a few minutes on issues around COVID that Dr. Hua touched upon before. Yes, there is a lot of technology like DNA sequencing and testing and the tracing that we discussed, which are directly for COVID in a sense. But while we're battling COVID, we are also having a socio-economic challenge to battle in parallel, an economic, business, a social challenge to battle in parallel. So technology has been playing a huge role there. To begin with, we are all here, a few thousand people registered and on this video, and more later on through YouTube and DingTalk in China, because of technology, right, in some sense. If we go back to this kind of other support functions or enabling innovative applications of technology for supporting the economy, the business, the education, the children, the older people, the society, can you give us a sense about those kind of technologies? So let me go back to Dr. Hua maybe, or whoever of you wants to start from, maybe Dr. Hua from Alibaba and others.
Oh, okay. Yes, besides those technology directly for fighting the virus, indeed, there are many others to support our daily life, education, and so on. Dr. Roger has already mentioned many of them here. Let me add a few words on three things. The first, online communication and conference platforms. There are many platforms available, including the one we are using now, and Alibaba's DingTalk, and quite a few others for work, for education, for experience and knowledge sharing. For example, on DingTalk, many students in China are using this to keep learning at home, and the teachers are using this to do online courses at home or at school. You can imagine the scale of the service we need to provide and the challenges to make it stable and high quality. And many small and medium-sized companies are also using these platforms to do business conferences. This helps reduce the impact to our economy. The second one is online grocery store and fast grocery delivery, such as Whole Foods Market in the United States, such as Hema in China. This is essential to ensure the implementation of the anti-epidemic measures. People don't need to get out to buy daily supplies, but do it online. And the challenge is the huge increase of such requests during the epidemic time. A lot of efforts need to be made for the whole supply chains. And the third one is remote diagnosis. Although we may use a robot, as I mentioned earlier, to answer generic questions from the general public for complex situations, we still need medical professionals online to handle. Well, for many situations, the patients don't need to go to the hospital in person if it is not an urgent situation, especially at the epidemic time. Reduce hospital clinic visit is both important to the patients and the medical institutions. The patients get lower risk to be infected, and the burden of the hospitals get reduced. Thus can put more efforts on helping critical patients. And this also help reduce anxieties from the general public, as well as to find the hidden infected peoples. When we have such online platform for them to use to get necessary information and even personalized advice, it really helps. Yeah.
I like I'm going to the word personalized you just mentioned. This is a topic, personalization, and as you know, Dr. Rodier, we shared the last few days some work we are doing here on this point of personalization for COVID-19. Personalization and technologies for personalization have been probably one of the core innovations, if you wish, the past 20 years. You know, from personalization of pricing, of insurance, of credit, of advertisement online. This has been driving lots of big tech. And I would love to see a lot more about, or learn a lot more about how much personalization there is really in COVID-19 policy. Because on the other hand, all we see is really that we all have a blanket lockdown, more or less, very little personalization. Although what you are just saying points to the opportunities of personalization depending on risks, risk assessments of different of patients depending on, or potentially infected people, which is something potentially very interesting to keep in mind also in that side and to explore. Dr. Rodier, would you like to share some thoughts about these other technologies, potentially on the supply chain, because supply chain either for PPEs or for you know, food, the basics, which hopefully we will not have any issues with going forward. I'm not sure if you see any of those risks in different countries, but also beyond that, other technologies that will be to support society and the economy, that will be very good. Thank you.
No, I mean, I can't speak in detail about technology because I'm not an expert in this area, but I would say it's clear that digitalization is reaching different areas. And I would just say beyond what has already been said by Dr. Huya, we're using this new technology for epidemiology, for biotechnology, for case management, for contact tracing, etc. But in fact, there are other areas that probably where technology must be used, which are in relation to epidemic or pandemic response. For instance, realize that most damages caused by outbreak are often linked to overreaction than to the disease itself, and to a number of side effects, I would say, of the response itself. There is a need for instance, rapid risk assessment. You can see all these travel restrictions, travel ban of entries that exist today. I'm sure a number of them could probably be, if not lifted, at least lessened for the sake of keeping the global supply chain running. To do so, we need actually some tools probably to facilitate rapid risk assessment from for travel from country A to country B, depending of the epidemiology of the disease on both countries, depending of the capacity of both countries, and a number of issues where we could have a much more personalized, but I would say flight route by flight route, what could be done and what kind of level of risk the receiving country will take. And that's an area where maybe we could have used that new technologies to have a better cost-benefit analysis to know what is an acceptable risk, taking into account there is no zero risk. And I think all decision makers know there is no zero risk, but we don't know what is an acceptable risk and how to assess it. Other areas around logistics issues, I mean, again, I mentioned the global supply chain, it really needs to be maintained. And today, to optimize the supply chain, I mean, also new technology could really help. Telemedicine was mentioned by Dr. Huya, and that's certainly also an area. Modelizations, anticipation of the trends of the epidemic, country by country, relatively personalized, or territory by territories. That's something that also probably could be done. So just to show that there are different areas which are directly in support to an epidemic response, which are not dealing directly with the health sectors, but which are extremely important for us and where maybe new technology could be applied. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for this. One of the topics that has also been raised, and I'll just share a few thoughts on that one from the people registered, from the audience registered for the event online on the questions, was around regulation. And we all know regulation and technology have to go hand in hand in many ways. And you touched upon policy challenges. Just a quick one of the regulations about, around privacy, for example, and sharing of data and data governance, which are probably in some ways, again, I'm going to use the unfortunate word, lucky in quotes. It's not lucky, obviously, but in some sense, we are, because all this happened today and not 10 years ago. Just to remind everybody on the audience, just before the world started talking and facing only COVID-19, the other big topic, or another big topic and big problem that everybody has been focusing on, of course, beyond climate change and health issues, obviously, was around new regulations for technology, which is a topic we're discussing now. So the EU, for example, published a very important white paper on AI and on data governance on February 19. That was just days before we were all taken for COVID. So I would be personally very interested to see, once we get out of COVID, and with all this experience we all had, and with all these changes of our lives we all had, and the lives cost around the world, thousands of people dying and different kind of symptoms, obviously, and being infected, I would be very curious to see how these various trade-offs, because it's all about trade-offs between transparency, privacy, accuracy, tracing, health prevention, coordination. There are many trade-offs. And as we saw during the whole discussion, there is a lot of moving parts to balance, many more than any of us can possibly think. I'd be very curious to see how all these discussions that stopped just before COVID, what were about technology policy going ahead, how they will restart and whether they will change at all and go towards a different direction, which can help us going forward, better coordinate and better balance all trade-offs for the better of the world, obviously. And of course, to improve lives in normal times, if you wish, and help the world going forward with, knock on wood, the next pandemic. Going forward and looking ahead, just as we are closing this discussion, a few thoughts, if you could share with us a few thoughts, both about what we could have done potentially better or different now, although it's too early to know. It's a bit of a risky question. Feel free to answer or not. But more important, what would be your wishes, if you like, having seen all these innovations and all these changes and all this compressed time the past couple of months happening? What would be your wish in terms of technology and in terms of policy or regulation going forward for the world to be better prepared to detect and respond to potentially future threats, especially as we are entering in, or we're already there, we're not entering, in the world where biotechnologies will play a huge role, and there will be lots of bio-related innovations, which some of them may be risky, who knows, going forward. But in general, what are your wishes for technology and policy going forward, and how can we get there? Any thoughts on these questions? Again, we can start from Dr. Hua, maybe, for the future.
One thing immediately comes to my mind is to find faster algorithms to speed up protein 3D structure discovery. If we can unveil a virus 3D structure in a few days, which means processing 100,000 3D images in an hour, mostly it will significantly expedite the development of drugs and vaccine. Another thing is epidemic monitoring and alerting. We do already have technologies to do epidemic prediction, which predicts the trends of a known epidemic. Well, can we have a system or mechanism to automatically discover possible epidemic and alert us in time? Another thing is that for epidemic prevention and control, one big challenge is to make all people aware that it is not only the task of the governments and the medical institutions, but everybody should be the first responsible person for it, at least for preventing from infection and preventing spreading. Yeah.
Thank you. It's fantastic, and I personally really hope that after all this ends, the innovation and the resources put in the innovation for science and technology will be even bigger than before, because if there is one thing that is different today versus years ago, it's really technology and science. But Dr. Rodier, going forward, of course, there are many other differences, policy, human behavior, as we discussed. Your wishes for the next, in preparation for the next pandemic, and how can we get there, as a closing remark?
Well, I think the key part is probably the fact that decision makers react on risk assessment. When you predict something, when you ask people to be prepared, they actually do it and not move to another priorities. I think my wish is very much around these issues, around speed, and of course around humans, not forgetting the human factors, because at the end we're always dealing with humans. It's a little bit sometimes, I will not say concerning, maybe a little bit, all this new technology. We don't know them very well. We know they're going to enter in our own privacy in a way, having a lot of data. There's a lot of question around these things. So I just hope that we will maintain human consideration, human right, and so on, to be fully considered. And that's dependent on the regulations too. But again, decision maker will have to listen to warning coming from all these new technologies when we apply them to predicting epidemics, or at least making a risk assessment of coming events.
Thank you. Great having you on this discussion. I'm sure the audience has really benefited from learning about all those complexities, both of the technology and the policy and the coordination and a lot of nuances. There is so much going on behind. All we can say, I guess, is that hopefully all those things will add up to something and will get us out of this quote unquote mess soon, wiser and safer. Thank you very much. And thank you also again, the INSEAD team and the TMT and Health Club alumni networks and all the alumni who helped for this organization. Everybody stay safe, and bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.